She didn't even look at me when she slid the envelope across the kitchen counter. "I filed this morning," my wife said, already reaching for her car keys. "My lawyer says it's pretty straightforward." I stood there in my old college sweatshirt, the one she'd been asking me to throw away for years, holding a coffee mug that was still too hot to drink. 3 weeks earlier, I had walked out of the Meridian Technologies office building for the last time, a cardboard box under my arm and 15 years of my career folded neatly inside it. The company had been acquired. My entire division, restructured. That was the word they used in the email. Restructured, like we were furniture being rearranged. "You're serious," I said. She finally looked up. "Marcus, I've been serious for a long time. You just weren't paying attention." She picked up her bag, the one I bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago, and walked out the front door without closing it behind her. I listened to her car back out of the driveway. I listened to the sound disappear down the street. Then I closed the door myself. Quietly. The way I do everything. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 31 years old. And the day my wife left me was the day she made the most expensive mistake of her life. She just didn't know it yet. Let me back up. I met my wife, Diane, at a mutual friend's rooftop party in Austin when I was 25. She was laughing at something across the room, and I remember thinking she was the kind of person who made a room feel louder just by being in it. I was quieter. I always have been. I was the guy in the corner thinking about the logistics of the catering setup while everyone else was dancing. That's just how my brain works. We dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony outside San Antonio. Her side of the family filled 3 rows. Mine was just my mother and my Uncle Ray, who drove 6 hours from Lubbock and wore a bolo tie. The first few years were fine. Better than fine, actually. She was working in marketing at a mid-size agency. I was doing my 9 to 5 at Meridian, building out their enterprise software infrastructure, which sounds boring to most people, and honestly, that's part of why I always loved it. Nobody asks boring people too many questions. What Diane didn't know, what she never thought to ask about, was that I'd been running something on the side for almost 4 years before we even met. A small software platform I'd built in my apartment during a particularly long winter. I called it RoutePath. It was a logistics routing system designed for regional trucking companies, the kind of mid-size operators too small for the big enterprise solutions but too complex for spreadsheets. I wasn't doing it for money at first. I was doing it because the problem annoyed me, and I wanted to fix it. By the time Diane and I got married, RoutePath had 11 paying clients. I never mentioned it at the wedding. It felt premature. By year 3 of our marriage, it had 43 clients. I still didn't mention it. This is where people usually ask me why. Why didn't I just tell her? And the honest answer is that I tried, once, early on. I mentioned I had a side project, something with software. She nodded and asked if I'd remembered to call the plumber about the guest bathroom. That was the end of that conversation. After a while I stopped bringing it up, not out of secrecy, but out of something closer to resignation. She wasn't interested in what I built. She was interested in what I provided, and I provided plenty. The house in Cedar Park was in my name. I handled all the finances. She had a credit card on one of my accounts and used it freely, which I never minded. Her mother's rehabilitation costs after the hip surgery, covered. Her younger brother's security deposit when he moved to Denver, covered. None of it was a burden. I managed money the way I managed everything else. Quietly and carefully. Then I got laid off, and something shifted in her face that I hadn't seen before. Not sympathy. Not even worry. Exactly. Something more like assessment. Like she was suddenly doing math. The fight started small. Why wasn't I networking more aggressively? Why did I seem so calm about everything? Didn't I understand how this looked? Her friends' husbands all had trajectories. Plans. She used that word a lot. Trajectory. I didn't tell her that 6 weeks before the layoff, I had received an acquisition offer for RoutePath from a logistics technology firm based out of Nashville called Crestline Systems. I didn't tell her that I had countered their offer. I didn't tell her that we were in the final stages of due diligence, and that my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia who I'd been working with for 2 years through the firm Holloway and Gregg, had advised me to keep the deal quiet until it closed. I didn't tell Diane any of it, not because I was planning anything. At that point, I wasn't. I was just following Patricia's counsel and quietly handling my business the way I always did. So when Diane slid those papers across the counter, she thought she was leaving an unemployed man in a sweatshirt. She was actually leaving the sole owner of a software company that was 11 days away from closing a sale. I picked up the envelope, read through it calmly, took a sip of my coffee, which had cooled to the right temperature by then, and I signed where indicated. On the line for my legal name, I wrote what I always write on business documents. Marcus Allen Hale. Not the name on our joint bank account, which was just Marcus Hale. Not the name on the lease we'd had before the house, or on any of the shared utilities. Marcus Allen Hale. The name on the Route Path LLC, on every Crestline negotiation document, on the account Patricia had helped me set up at a private banking institution in Dallas 2 years ago, when the client revenue first crossed a threshold that required more sophisticated management. Diane had been at our wedding when the officiant read my full legal name aloud. She had signed our marriage certificate as my witness, but in 6 years of marriage, she had never once looked at the name on the Route Path filings, never asked about the LLC, never opened the mail from Holloway and Gregg that I always retrieved from the box before she got home. She had married Marcus Hale. She had just divorced Marcus Allen Hale. They were the same person. But legally, in ways that mattered more than she would ever anticipate, they lived in very different worlds. The first thing I did after she left was call Patricia. "Papers are signed," I said. "You okay?" She asked. "Let's close the deal," I said. Patricia had a way of pausing before she spoke that always made me feel like the smartest person in the room had just confirmed I was also being smart. She paused. Then she said, "I'll reach out to Crestline Monday morning." That weekend, I stayed in the house. I wasn't served any paperwork requiring me to leave, and I wasn't about to. I cooked. I finished a novel I'd been reading for 6 months. I went on a long run Sunday morning through the neighborhood we'd chosen together 3 years ago because she liked the trees. Monday morning, Diane texted me that she was staying at her friend Cassidy's place in South Austin, and that I should expect to hear from her attorney. I replied, "Sounds good." That same Monday, Patricia confirmed that Crestline had completed due diligence. The acquisition was moving to final signatures by end of week. On Thursday, I signed the closing documents in Patricia's conference room on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Austin. Patricia had a bottle of sparkling water waiting. No champagne, because she knew I didn't drink. I appreciated that about her. The wire transfer hit the account registered to Marcus Allen Hale on Friday morning. I won't share the exact number. What I will say is that it had 8 digits. The kind of number that rearranges your relationship with the concept of the future. I did not post about it. I did not call anyone. I went home, made a sandwich, and watched a documentary about deep-sea fish that I'd been saving. Meanwhile, Diane had moved into a short-term furnished rental in a part of Austin with good brunch spots and better Instagram lighting. She was posting a lot. Captions about fresh chapters and knowing your worth and breathing room. Her friend Cassidy was liking everything within 30 seconds. She also posted a photo with a man named Derek. He was a personal trainer at the gym she joined 6 months ago, the one I'd been paying for. He had the particular kind of attractiveness that requires about 2 hours of daily maintenance. In the photo they were at a food truck, laughing. The caption said "good energy only." I recognized Derek because he had come to our house once, about 4 months earlier, supposedly to drop off some equipment for a class Diane was organizing. He had stayed for 40 minutes. I had been working in my home office and hadn't thought much of it at the time. I thought more about it now. I didn't react publicly. I just made a note. That same week, I texted Diane one thing. The gym membership expires at the end of the month. I won't be renewing it since we're separated. Just want to give you time to set up your own account. She responded with 3 words. "Are you serious?" I did not respond. 10 days after the sale closed, I sat down and did something I'd been putting off. I restructured my accounts. I moved the settlement funds into a trust managed under Marcus Allen Hale. I removed myself from the 2 joint accounts I'd shared with Diane, transferring my portion to the trust. What remained in those joint accounts was exactly what Diane had contributed over the years, which was modest. She had been in marketing, but she'd also been what her friends kindly called a free spender. I was not taking anything that wasn't mine. I was simply organizing what had always been mine. The house was in my name. That was not changing. I also made a call I'd been delaying. About 18 months earlier, I had quietly established a small foundation called the Hale Family Initiative. It was named in honor of my mother, who had spent 23 years as a public school librarian and who had died of pancreatic cancer 4 years ago, leaving me with grief that still surprised me sometimes on Tuesday afternoons for no particular reason. The foundation had been funding 3 things: literacy programs at 2 Title I schools in the Austin area, a scholarship at a community college in Lubbock where my Uncle Ray had once taken night classes, and the ongoing care costs at the memory care facility where Diane's grandmother had been living for the past 2 years. Diane had attended the foundation's one public event, a small dinner, and had told her friends she supported a literacy nonprofit. She had never asked the name of the funding entity. She had never seen the letterhead. I called the facility in Houston where her grandmother lived and updated the billing contact to route directly through a new account. Her grandmother's care would continue uninterrupted. That was not something I was willing to punish, but I removed Diane's name from the family contact notification list because she was no longer family. She found out about that one first. She called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice already climbing before I finished saying hello. Grandma's facility called me and said I've been removed from the account? Marcus, what is going on? Are you cutting off my grandmother? Her care is fully funded, I said. She won't be affected. But the billing contact has changed. Who is paying for it? The Hale Family Initiative. Silence. What is that? A foundation I run. More silence. A different kind this time. Since when do you run a foundation? Since about 1.5 years ago. She hung up. Called back 4 minutes later. I need you to explain to me what is happening, she said. Her voice was different now. Quieter. That particular quietness that happens when someone realizes the ground might not be where they thought it was. I think you should talk to your attorney, I said. I'll have Patricia reach out. Who is Patricia? My attorney. She didn't know I had an attorney. She had assumed, I suppose, that the divorce would be handled by her lawyer on one side and whatever public form I filled out on the other. That's the version of me she'd built in her head. The quiet, slightly passive, moderately employed man who would sign things and move on. I said goodnight and ended the call. The next morning, Patricia sent a letter to Diane's attorney outlining the full scope of my legal and financial situation. I was not present for that conversation. But Patricia told me later that there had been a long pause on the other end of the line after she finished speaking. Here is what they learned. The house was purchased solely in my name. No joint equity. Diane had contributed nothing to the down payment and nothing to the mortgage, which I had paid from my own income. Under Texas law, I had pathways to retain it. The vehicles, both of them, were registered through Marcus Allen Hale, which in the context of the purchase agreements functioned as a separate legal identity from the Marcus Hale on our joint accounts. Her attorney spent 2 days trying to untangle this, and eventually confirmed that Diane had no legal claim to either car. The investment accounts, the ones Diane had vaguely known existed, were registered to the trust, premarital asset, established before our wedding. Clean documentation going back 9 years. The acquisition proceeds had never touched any jointly held account. They had been wired directly into the trust. There was nothing to divide. The divorce settlement that Diane had confidently filed expecting to receive her fair share of the life we'd built together came back with a single figure. Her attorney called it, in what I imagine was a very uncomfortable meeting, a challenging outcome. Diane called me that night from what sounded like Cassidy's car. I could hear Cassidy in the background saying, "Oh my God," repeatedly. "Tell me this isn't real," Diane said. "It's real. You hid all of this from me." I thought about that for a moment before I answered. I didn't hide it. You never asked. We were married for 6 years, Marcus. We were. And in 6 years you never once asked me what I was building. You never looked at a piece of mail from my business address. You never asked about the LLC. You never asked who Patricia was, or what the Hale Family Initiative did, or why I was always so calm about money. I paused. You assumed you knew who I was. That's not the same as actually knowing. She didn't say anything for a long moment. I didn't think I had to ask, she finally said. You were my husband. I know, I said, and I meant it, not as cruelty, but as something much sadder. I know you didn't. I moved out of the Cedar Park house 2 weeks later. Not because I had to, but because I didn't want to live in a place that felt like a museum of something that was over. I bought a condo downtown, smaller, quieter, high enough that I could see the city lights at night. I also made one purchase I'd been putting off for a long time. A proper desk. Oak. Solid. The kind you don't buy when you're trying to keep a low profile. Diane's situation continued to evolve in ways I heard about secondhand through a mutual friend named Greg, who kept me updated with the tone of someone reporting on a nature documentary. The furnished rental was expensive, and her salary alone didn't stretch as far as she'd expected without the supplemental income she had never technically received, but had also never technically gone without. Derek, the personal trainer, turned out to be less interested once the rooftop dinners required someone to actually pay for them. She also received a formal letter from the Hale Family Initiative informing her that the scholarship she had mentioned at 2 separate dinner parties as something she personally supported would be renamed the Margaret Hale Literacy Fund, after my mother, and that her connection to the organization had concluded. The letter was polite. Patricia wrote it. I heard she had to Google the foundation to understand what she'd been associated with. I was not watching from a distance to gloat. I want to be clear about that. There was no pleasure in it, exactly. It was more like the particular stillness you feel when a complicated equation finally resolves. Everything had always been what it was. The only thing that had changed was that now she could see it too. A few weeks later, an editor at a regional business publication reached out to me for a comment on the RoutePath acquisition. Small deal by some standards, but notable in the logistics software space. I agreed to a brief interview on the condition that it focused on the technology and not on me personally. The piece ran on a Thursday. It was 4 paragraphs. It mentioned RoutePath, mentioned Crestline, mentioned the founding story, and included my name. Marcus Allen Hale, it said. Founder and sole developer. I don't know exactly how Diane found the article. I imagine someone sent it to her. I imagine that sitting alone in her expensive furnished rental, reading 4 paragraphs about the man she had decided was not worth staying for, felt a certain way. She texted me once after that. I didn't know. I read it. I set my phone face down on the new oak desk. Outside the window, Austin was doing what Austin always does, moving fast, loud, bright. I didn't respond. Not because I was still angry. The anger had never really been the point. I responded the way I always respond to things that no longer require my energy. I let the silence do the work. Some people assume that quiet men are empty. That if we're not performing our ambition, our grief, our intelligence, we must not have any. Diane had looked at me in that sweatshirt and done the math she thought she was qualified to do and come up with a number that felt too small to stay for. She didn't know she was only seeing one variable. She didn't know about Patricia, or RoutePath, or the trust, or the 8-digit wire transfer, or the foundation named after my mother, or the 14 clients I'd already been in conversations with about a second platform I'd been designing in the same quiet hours she thought I was just watching television. She didn't know, because she never asked. And I had learned a long time ago not to explain myself to people who had already decided they understood me. I keep a framed quote above the desk now. My mother cross-stitched it when I was 12. I found it in a box. After she died, I finally got it framed last year. It says, "Still water runs deep." I look at it sometimes when I'm working late and the city is going dark outside my window. And I think about all the things that are built in silence, in patience, in the unglamorous hours when no one is looking. They are usually the things that last.